It started as a perfect spring day. The fourth-grade class from Millridge Elementary had taken their long-anticipated field trip to Alder Grove Park, a lush stretch of greenery that curved along the edge of the forest. It was the kind of place where sunlight filtered through tall pine trees and dragonflies skimmed over still ponds. Teachers organized scavenger hunts, handed out juice boxes, and watched over the kids like hawks. Nothing was supposed to go wrong. But by 2:47 p.m., one of the boys was missing. Eli Warner, 9 years old, small for his age, brown hair, big eyes, a nervous kind of quiet. He'd last been seen near the nature trail, walking a few feet behind the group, holding a notebook. One moment he was there, and then he wasn't. The search began immediately. Teachers ran up and down the trail calling his name. Parents were notified. Park rangers combed the area. By 4 p.m., Millridge PD was on site. At 4:23, Officer Grace Keller arrived, along with K9 Shadow. Shadow was a black Belgian Malinois, trained in scent tracking, evidence detection, and, when necessary, protection. Sleek, smart, and serious, much like Grace herself. Grace crouched beside the last place Eli had been seen and showed Shadow a T-shirt taken from the boy's backpack. "Find him," she whispered. Shadow sniffed it once, then lowered his nose to the dirt and began moving with purpose. The rest of the team fanned out. The teachers were distraught. The children had been loaded onto buses, except for 2 who were too shaken to speak. Eli's parents had arrived and were being consoled by an officer. But the panic was setting in. Everyone feared the same thing. They were just too afraid to say it. Grace followed Shadow as he zigzagged through the underbrush near the tree line. Nose twitching, tail high. 10 minutes passed. Then 20. The trail was faint, unreliable, scent broken by dozens of feet. Wind, and too much time lost. Shadow paused at a clearing. It wasn't big, maybe 20 feet across, flat, with crushed grass and uneven patches of dirt. But what caught Grace's attention were the tire tracks. Deep, fresh, and not from any park maintenance vehicle. 2 lines, narrow, off-road. She knelt down, brushing fingers across the indentation. "This wasn't here yesterday," she murmured. Someone drove in. Beside the tire tracks was something else, a small, torn piece of paper, dirty, weathered, but definitely not trash. Grace picked it up with gloves and looked closer. Part of a drawing. Crayon marks. Red, blue, green, maybe a stick figure, maybe a house. The edges were jagged, as if ripped from a larger sheet. She sealed it in a bag. Shadow let out a sharp bark, startling the nearby officers. Grace looked at him. He was standing by the edge of the clearing, nose down again, growling faintly. "Shadow, what is it?" she asked. He didn't bark again, but he wouldn't move forward. He just stood there, tense, watching the forest like it might move back. Grace rose and scanned the area. Nothing but trees, no footprints. No signs of struggle, just the tracks, the paper, and silence. The investigation expanded that night. Search teams brought in drones. Volunteers combed the woods. A helicopter circled. Grace stayed with Shadow, going over the trail again and again. But the pieces didn't fit. There was no sign Eli had wandered off alone, no trail. No broken branches. Kids don't vanish like smoke. Something had taken him. By midnight, the temperature had dropped and the search was paused. Grace sat on the edge of the clearing with Shadow curled by her boots. She pulled out the paper again. The drawing, she realized now, looked like a park. Trees, a square that might be a building, a small circle with lines that could be a wheel. A bike. It wasn't a random scrap. It was something Eli had drawn. And if it had been left behind, maybe it meant he'd tried to leave a trail someone else had tried to erase. Grace made a call to the school. Did Eli have any enemies? Anyone he avoided? Adults? Maybe volunteers? No, the principal said, voice tight with worry. He was quiet, but he got along with everyone. Though, there was one man, a substitute maintenance worker, showed up last week, said he was filling in from the county. Wore red coveralls, didn't talk much. Name, didn't sign in, said it was a short job. Cleaned up trash bins, then gone. Security footage? Not at that time. Camera was under repair. Grace's pulse quickened. It was too thin for a lead, but her gut said it wasn't nothing. She wrote it down anyway. Unknown male, red coveralls, possibly connected. The next morning, a deeper sweep of the park found another clue. Near a secluded access road on the north side, searchers discovered faint tire prints leading to the main highway. Same width as the ones in the clearing. Shadow was brought back in. This time, they gave him a new scent. Eli's drawing notebook. Recovered from his classroom desk. He sniffed it once, then bolted in the direction of the access road. The team followed, but it led only to the shoulder of the highway, and nothing beyond. No cameras, no eyewitnesses. It was as if the boy had been scooped out of the park and erased. But Shadow stood by the road, staring out into the distance, unmoving. Grace sat in her cruiser that night, going over her notes. She had the paper, the tire tracks, a vehicle with no ID, and a maybe sighting of a man who shouldn't have been anywhere near a school. Not enough. But she also had a scent trail, a partner who wouldn't give up. And one question burned into her skull. Why leave the drawing behind? Because Eli wanted someone to find it. And if that was true, then maybe, just maybe, he was still alive. She looked at Shadow. Tomorrow, we do it again, she said. Shadow's ears perked up. He was ready. The warehouse sat like a forgotten skeleton at the edge of the tree line, rusted, sagging, and shrouded in silence. Long abandoned. It was one of several structures on the perimeter of Alder Grove Park. Overlooked for years, locals remembered it once housed gardening tools, fertilizer, maybe even maintenance vehicles, but no one had set foot inside for a decade or more. It became a new point of interest only because of its location, less than a mile from the clearing where Eli Warner had disappeared. The day was overcast, gray clouds heavy with unshed rain. Officer Grace Keller stood at the threshold of the warehouse, hand resting on Shadow's collar. The dog's nose twitched. his body already alert before the door was even opened. 3 other officers were with her, Detectives Ramos and Shelley, and Officer Bell from the local patrol unit. None of them were particularly enthusiastic about being there. The place looked like it might collapse if they breathed too hard. "This is a dead end," Ramos muttered, pushing the heavy door with his shoulder. The hinges screamed. "We're just checking everything within radius," Grace replied. "If it's nothing, we move on." The interior was dim, shafts of dusty light filtering through cracked windows. The floor was layered in grime and old leaves. Rows of shelves lined the walls, warped and empty. A few broken crates, a rusted wheelbarrow, and an oil drum lay scattered across the concrete. Shadow took one step inside. Then another. He sniffed low, methodically. Grace let him lead. "You smell something, boy?" she asked. He didn't respond, but his posture said everything. Tense, focused, like a switch had flipped inside him. They made their way to the far corner, where a tower of forgotten junk slumped under a canvas tarp. Broken chairs, rotten boards, a bicycle frame. But then Shadow stopped, and barked. It was sudden, sharp, and echoing. The sound bounced off the metal walls, startling everyone in the room. "Whoa," Shelley said. "Easy, dog." But Shadow didn't ease. He barked again, louder. Then growled, low and menacing. He was facing a dusty metal box, roughly the size of a milk crate, partially wedged behind an old shelving unit. "What's he doing?" Bell asked, frowning. "It's a box. A junk box," Ramos added, "probably full of screws or rusted nails." But Shadow didn't back down. He snarled now, body pressed low to the ground, tail stiff. He wasn't reacting to a scent of danger. He was reacting to something specific. Something inside. Grace moved closer. "Back up," she said. The officers stepped away as she knelt in front of the box. The lid was dented, corners rusted shut, but not locked. She examined it without touching. "See anything?" Ramos asked. "No," she said, "but Shadow's telling us something's here." "You really think?" "I think he's trained for this." She stood. "Open it." Ramos hesitated. "Could be nothing. Or it could be everything." She said flatly, "Open it." He sighed, pulled out a crowbar, and wedged it under the edge. With a grunt, he pried the lid free. It creaked as it gave way. The moment the box opened, the smell hit them. Rot. Not overpowering, but unmistakable. Organic. Stale. Inside were objects layered beneath a dirty towel, an old sock, a handful of dried leaves, and something metallic. Grace pulled on gloves and carefully removed each item, one by one. First, the sock, child-sized, dirt-stained, hole at the toe, a faint red streak across the heel. Next, a torn plastic badge, like something from a school field trip. Faded lettering, but partially legible. "Hi, my name is Eli," Ramos swore under his breath. Shelley stepped closer. "That's his. His mom said he was wearing a badge." Then came the third item. A digital watch, children's size, cracked screen, no power, but the back was engraved. "To Eli, love." Dad. Grace's jaw clenched. Get this to forensics. Now. Shadow let out another bark, short. Urgent. Grace looked into the bottom of the box. One last item remained. A photograph. She lifted it slowly, careful not to damage it. It was a Polaroid, grainy and slightly warped from moisture. It showed the corner of a room, concrete walls. A dirty mattress. A single chair. In the far right corner, huddled and blurry, was the shape of a small boy. He wasn't looking at the camera, but his shoes were the same ones described in the missing persons report. Jesus, Belle whispered. That's him, Grace said. That's Eli. Shelley snapped a picture of the photo in Grace's hand and texted it to HQ. I'll get this to missing persons. They'll confirm with the parents. Grace turned to Ramos. We're not dealing with a random disappearance. Someone used this warehouse recently. Ramos nodded. We'll need to scan for prints. DNA. Everything. But Grace wasn't done. She turned back to Shadow, who was now standing near the doorway again. Nose twitching. You smell something else? She asked. Shadow looked up at her, then turned, and walked to the far wall of the warehouse, toward what appeared to be a pile of discarded boards stacked against a concrete foundation. He pawed at the base. What is it, boy? Grace asked, following. Ramos joined her. Just wood. No, Grace said, not just wood. She pulled the boards back, and behind them was a door. Low, rusted, almost invisible in the shadows. A service hatch or storm cellar. Inset into the foundation. No lock, just a sliding bolt. She pulled it open. A waft of cold air spilled out. A dark set of stairs led downward. Ramos swore again. Basement. Flashlights. Grace said. They descended slowly, step by creaking step. The air grew colder, damp. The smell worsened. At the bottom was a concrete room, small. About 10 feet by 10. A bucket in one corner. An old space heater. A pile of blankets. And scribbles on the wall. Drawings done in crayon. Stick figures. Houses. Trees. One said. In shaky, uneven print. I want to go home. But the room was empty. No Eli. Not anymore. Back outside. The entire warehouse was secured as a crime scene. Forensics teams arrived within the hour. The metal box was catalogued. The items documented. And the photograph verified. Eli's parents confirmed the watch. And the badge. The search shifted from a general sweep of the park to a targeted manhunt. The warehouse wasn't just storage. It had been used. Prepared. Possibly staged as a holding location. Someone had taken Eli there. Someone who was still out there. And if not for Shadow's bark, just one sound in a sea of silence, it would have all been missed. Grace knelt beside him as the sun began to break through the clouds, casting light on the abandoned building. You found him, she whispered. Not all the way, but enough to know he's still out there. Shadow looked at her, eyes steady, ready. Grace stood. Let's bring him home. The air inside the warehouse shifted the moment the box opened. Grace felt it first, not a physical change, but a pressure, like the atmosphere itself had gone cold and alert. The other officers leaned in, expecting more scrap, more discarded remnants. But as she pulled away the last layer of cloth, what sat beneath wasn't a toy, or a photograph, or even a memento. It was a device. Rectangular, metal casing, black wires curled like vines around a small timing unit. A blinking red light pulsed steadily on one end. Grace's breath hitched. "Back up," she said sharply. "Now." Ramos was already moving. "Is that? Could be a tracker. Could be something worse." Officer Shelley knelt beside her. "Looks like a makeshift timer. Could be a trap." Grace nodded. "Call the bomb squad. Now." The others backed away quickly. Radios crackling. Grace stayed where she was, eyes never leaving the blinking light. It was steady, not rapid, which, in her experience, meant one of two things: a decoy, or something waiting to be triggered. But the implications ran deeper. Someone had planted this box, hidden it, protected it, and it contained not just objects, it contained intent. There was more inside. With steady hands, she lifted a small black camcorder, a mini DV model. The kind sold cheap in electronics stores a decade ago. No markings, no branding. It was duct-taped around the lens and battery. Clearly tampered with. Someone had wanted it to record, but not be noticed. Grace sealed it immediately in an evidence bag. Then she saw the shirt, crumpled beneath the towel and shoved into the corner of the box. The fabric was thin, soft, light blue. She pulled it out carefully. A child's T-shirt. On the front, faded cartoon dinosaurs danced in a circle. The bottom seam was torn, and a dark smear near the collar had already begun to dry into a crusted maroon. Grace's voice was low when she spoke into her radio. "We've recovered what appears to be the missing child's shirt, with possible blood evidence. Bomb unit en route for device assessment. Suspect use of tracking or IED components." But she didn't move. Because Shadow wasn't moving. He stood near the box still. But his head was turned, ears erect, body stiff. He wasn't looking at the device. He was looking past it, toward the center of the room, nose high, sniffing the air. "Shadow?" Grace asked softly. He didn't bark. He began to move. The others were still busy outside, marking off the building perimeter and coordinating with the approaching bomb squad. Grace followed Shadow slowly, flashlight beam bouncing over cracked tiles and scattered debris. The dog moved carefully, sniffing along the floor until he reached the center of the warehouse. And stopped. He circled once, then began to paw at the concrete. Grace crouched. She saw it immediately, a faint seam in the floor. Dust had almost completely disguised it. But it was there, a line that outlined a square about 3 feet wide. She knocked on it with her flashlight. "Hollow. Trapdoor," she murmured. Shadow growled. Grace radioed in. "I need backup inside. We've got a hidden entry beneath the floor. Possible concealment area." Ramos and Shelley came running, weapons drawn. Bell returned from the outer perimeter. Ramos looked at the floor. "Booby-trapped. No sign of it," Grace said. "But tread carefully." They pried the floor open using a crowbar and utility knives. With a grunt, The metal hatch lifted, and the stink hit instantly. Damp, mold, and something else, body odor. Old sweat. Rot masked poorly with chemical cleaner. Flashlights revealed a narrow ladder descending into darkness. Grace went first. The air was colder here. Heavier. The passage led to a crawl space barely tall enough to stand in. The walls were lined with worn insulation. One end was blocked off by a makeshift door, plywood bolted to metal hinges. Grace opened it slowly. Inside was a chamber, no more than 10 feet by 10. Cement floor, a bare mattress, a bucket, a dim, battery-powered lantern bolted to the wall. Everything looked makeshift, temporary, but lived in. She stepped aside as Shadow moved in. He sniffed, circled, then barked once. Short, sharp. Something had been here. Recently. Grace approached a corner and knelt beside a torn blanket. Something glinted beneath it. A toy truck. Red plastic. Missing wheels. Dented. Next to it, a stack of drawing paper. Crumpled. Damp, but still legible. Stick figures. Trees. A house. A dog. One image showed a square with a small figure behind lines, bars. Grace. Ramos called from the opposite wall. She turned. He was pointing to something etched in the concrete. Letters scratched roughly, unevenly, with what looked like a rock or broken tool. E. L. I. Below that, I am here. The silence after that hung like a noose. He was down here, Grace said. They kept him here. But not anymore, Ramos said. Whoever it was. They moved him. Probably once they knew we were getting close. Shelley emerged from the ladder, holding a clipboard taken from the upper level. We found a schedule, she said. Dates, times. Looks like feeding intervals. It's organized, not random. So this wasn't panic, Grace said. It was planned. She looked around the room again, at the worn mattress. The old food cans. The empty water bottles. It was like a bunker. Temporary, but deliberate. A holding cell. For a child. And now it was empty. Back upstairs. The bomb squad confirmed the device wasn't an explosive. But it was dangerous. It was a repurposed GPS unit. Rigged with a fail-safe that could trigger a fire or short-circuit remotely. Grace realized immediately. It wasn't meant to kill. It was meant to destroy evidence. Had they taken too long to find it, the box, and everything inside, might have gone up in smoke. The camcorder, once inspected, contained a single clip. Grainy, dated a few days earlier. It showed a corner of the basement chamber. No face, just a figure sitting on the mattress, rocking slightly, breathing audibly. Then a voice off camera. Adult, male, calm, almost rehearsed. Be good, be quiet, we're almost done here. Then static. The footage ended. By nightfall, the warehouse was shut down. Sealed under state police orders. News had leaked, and reporters circled like hawks. But Grace didn't leave. She stayed by the hatch, watching it being reinforced with metal and chains. Shadow sat beside her. You found it again, she whispered, running a hand down his neck. Every time we get close. You're the one who leads the way. He didn't bark, just pressed his head against her leg. Steady as stone. The boy was alive. She felt it. But someone was moving him like a piece on a board. And they were always one step ahead. Not for long. Grace stood and looked out at the trees beyond the warehouse. Somewhere out there, Eli was waiting, drawing pictures in his mind, whispering to himself in the dark. "I am here." Grace tightened her grip on Shadow's leash. "We're coming, Eli," she said, "and we won't stop until we do." The hatch beneath the warehouse floor groaned as it swung open a second time. The stale, cold air curling up from below like a breath held too long. This time, the team was ready. Grace led the entry, vest secured. Flashlight in one hand, the other resting near her sidearm. Behind her, Ramos and Shelley followed, and Shadow descended ahead of them. Careful, silent, the faint scuff of his paws echoed in the narrow tunnel. What lay beyond that hidden door wasn't just another crawlspace. It was something deeper, a concrete shaft, roughly carved into the earth, stretched forward into darkness. The air was damp and foul, tinged with the metallic scent of rust and mold. Pipes lined the ceiling above, wrapped in old insulation. Footprints, booted, recent, stained the dirt floor. Someone had been moving through here. Not long ago. Whoever did this knew what they were doing. Ramos muttered. Reinforced the ceiling. Concrete walls. This wasn't just a panic shelter. It was a prison, Grace said. They followed the tunnel for 30 feet until it widened into a space just large enough to turn around. Another door, metal, thick, no handle, just a sliding lock. Shadow growled. Grace moved forward, heart pounding. She motioned for the others to cover her, then slowly slid the bolt back. It gave with a reluctant clunk. Her hand gripped the edge of the door. She pushed. The door creaked open. Inside was a room no bigger than a shipping container, surrounded on all sides by soundproofing foam, egg crate panels taped crudely to the walls. Carpet remnants stapled across the ceiling. No windows. A single LED bulb hung from the ceiling on a wire, casting weak, yellow light. In the center of the room, on a thin mattress surrounded by empty juice boxes, granola bar wrappers, and a bucket, was a boy. Eli Warner, alive. He blinked as the light hit him, eyes wide and stunned, like he couldn't trust what he was seeing. Dirt smudged his face. His lips were cracked, but he was breathing, moving, watching them with recognition and disbelief. Grace didn't wait. She dropped to her knees. "Eli," she said, voice soft but firm, "you're safe now. We're here." His lower lip trembled. He opened his mouth, but no sound came. "It's okay," she said. "You don't have to talk. Just nod if you can hear me." A small, slow nod. Then, a movement behind her. Shadow. The dog had approached cautiously, but now sat just beside Grace. His posture relaxed. Eli's eyes fixed on him. For the first time, something shifted in the boy's expression. Relief. Maybe even the beginning of trust. Grace called in the find over the radio. "We have him. I repeat, we have the missing child. Alive. Medical needed at the North Access Tunnel. No immediate threats inside." Ramos moved quickly to assess the scene. No restraints. No signs of fresh injury. He's malnourished but stable. He's going to be okay. But Grace was already scanning the room. Her eyes landed on a corner shelf. There, half hidden beneath a roll of duct tape, was the mini camcorder from the box. Another one. Its red light was off, but it had clearly been recording recently. A second camera, hidden here, in the ceiling. She reached up, inspecting it. The lens pointed toward the bed. Toward the boy. It wasn't live anymore, but it had been active. Which meant someone had watched. Recorded. And maybe still was. Eli was carefully lifted onto a stretcher and carried out through the tunnel. His hands clutched around a tattered drawing, one he'd made to stay sane. A house, a dog, a small figure standing in a window. As he passed, he whispered a word, "Shadow." Grace walked behind them, heart pounding in her throat. As she passed the wall where the shelf had been, something caught her eye, a smudge. She shone her flashlight closer. A partial palm print. Greasy, faint, but definitely human. "Bag this area," she ordered. "We've got a print." She turned to Shelley. "Camera? Still intact," Shelley said. "If there's anything on it, we'll find out." Ramos glanced back toward the tunnel. Whoever this guy is, he had everything planned. But he left fast. Too fast, Grace murmured. Which means he knew we were coming. She remembered the device in the metal box upstairs. The GPS unit. The timer. The failsafe. Whoever did this hadn't just vanished into the woods. He had been watching the rescue happen. And he'd left before the net closed. Hours later, at the precinct, the digital forensics team loaded the contents of the second camcorder. Grace stood over their shoulders. Arms crossed, jaw tight. The video file was time-stamped 2 days earlier. The footage opened in the same soundproofed room. Eli was lying on the mattress, curled on his side, eyes closed. A man stood just outside the frame, only a portion of his body visible. Torso, arm, red flannel sleeve. Grace's stomach turned. The voice was distorted, run through some kind of filter. Even so, the tone was unmistakable. "I'll be back," it said. "Be quiet. Be smart." Then the figure reached toward the camera and shut it off. That was all. Not a full face. Not a name. But enough. The sleeve matched earlier witness reports. The man in red. Seen near the school weeks before. And now, with a partial print, a timeline, and a camera angle that might yield biometric clues. They had more than suspicion. They had a direction. Back at the hospital, Grace stood outside Eli's room. The boy was sleeping now. Clean, fed, monitored. His parents sat at his bedside, holding his hands as if they feared he might slip away again. But he wouldn't, not this time. Grace sat down in the hallway with Shadow. She ran a hand through his coat. And he rested his chin on her boot. "You did it again," she whispered. "You found the tunnel. You got us to him." Shadow closed his eyes. No words. No medals. No speeches. Just silence. And the steady rhythm of a heart that never backed down. Grace looked through the window again at the boy in the bed. Still alive. Because a dog barked at a box no one else thought mattered. And because someone believed that every small clue could be the one that saved a life. The morning sky over Alder Grove Park was a perfect, cloudless blue. Birds chirped in the trees. Children ran barefoot in the grass. And the laughter of neighbors filled the air. But today wasn't just another picnic. Or another sunny weekend. Today was for Shadow. Rows of folding chairs lined the field near the bandstand. Every one of them filled. Reporters clutched notepads. TV cameras tracked every move. And banners flapped in the breeze. The words printed across the largest one read, "Honoring Shadow, Canine Hero." At the front of the stage, a small podium stood next to a polished wooden plaque bearing a golden medallion, a paw print framed by laurel leaves. Engraved with the words "for bravery and service beyond duty." Shadow sat beside it calmly, his black coat gleaming in the sun, tongue hanging slightly from the side of his mouth. He wore his formal service harness, with a brand new tag shaped like a star. Grace Keller stood next to him. Not in uniform today, but her posture was just as sharp as ever. In her hands was a speech she hadn't planned to read. Because when she looked at Shadow, words always felt small. Instead, she stepped to the microphone and let instinct guide her. "When I first partnered with Shadow," she began, "I was told he was sharp, relentless, and impossible to fool." Laughter rippled through the crowd. They said, "He doesn't like games, and he doesn't care for treats. He works, period." A few people chuckled again. But many listened in silent admiration. "I didn't realize until much later," Grace continued, "just how true that was. Because while I was still catching up, Shadow was already leading the way." She turned slightly to look at him. He blinked at her. "It was a bark," she said. "Just one, at a dusty, metal box in the corner of an abandoned warehouse. A box every human in that room had dismissed. A piece of trash, a forgotten object. But Shadow knew better." Her voice tightened. "Inside that box was the first real evidence that led us to Eli Warner. Inside was a timer, a camera, and a piece of that child's life. Without that bark, we might never have found him in time." She paused, and the crowd grew quiet. "We talk about instincts, training, procedures, but sometimes, what saves a life isn't a policy. It's a dog who won't stop until the job is done." She gestured toward the medallion. "This isn't just a medal for bravery. It's a reminder to trust the quiet, to trust the bark no one expects, to remember that even when we hesitate, there's someone beside us who doesn't." She stepped back. The mayor came forward, holding the medal. With a slight bow, he placed it around Shadow's neck, custom designed with a wide band and gold insignia. The crowd erupted into applause. People stood. Phones lifted. Children clapped with unfiltered joy. Some calling Shadow's name. "Shadow, good boy, Shadow." Grace knelt beside him, one arm around his shoulders. He stayed calm, unbothered by the attention, but his eyes scanned the crowd like always. Watching, guarding. The ceremony went viral. Within hours, clips flooded social media. The bark at the box. Grace's speech. The medal ceremony. Even a short video of Eli visiting Shadow at the precinct the day before. In one now famous photo, Eli is kneeling beside Shadow, one arm thrown around the dog's neck, a crayon drawing in his other hand. It shows the two of them under a tree, with the words, "My hero," hashtags like hashtag Shadow the hero, hashtag Canine Instinct, and hashtag Trust the Bark trended globally. Local news called it a miracle rescue made possible by a bark. National outlets called it a symbol of unflinching loyalty in a world of uncertainty. People who had never heard of Millridge now knew it as the town with the dog who wouldn't quit. Back at the station, the plaque was mounted in the main hallway. Right beside it, a framed copy of the photograph with Eli's drawing. Underneath, a small brass plate reads, "Shadow, K9 Officer, for unshakable instinct, tireless service, and the bark that saved a life." Grace walked by it every day. Sometimes she stopped, other times she just nodded. But the story didn't fade. Schools invited her to speak. K9 training centers requested to profile Shadow. The department received letters from around the world, children, officers, parents, survivors, all saying the same thing. "Thank you." One afternoon, about a week later, Grace and Shadow returned to Alder Grove Park, quiet now. Sun dappled and still. She didn't bring a leash. Just trust. They walked the same trail that Eli had wandered off from. The trees whispered in the breeze. A swing creaked somewhere in the distance. Grace sat on the same bench she'd rested on during the first day of the search. Back when they had nothing but fading hope and scattered footprints. Shadow lay beside her. "It always starts small," she said aloud. "A missing kid, a torn paper, a box no one notices." She looked down at him. "But you noticed. You always notice." He didn't bark this time. He didn't have to. Grace smiled, then leaned back and let the silence wash over them. Not the silence of fear or loss, but of peace reclaimed, hard won, deserved. There would always be more calls, more cases, more days when instinct mattered more than evidence. But today was for the bark that saved a life. Today was for Shadow.
Thank you for watching the video. If you enjoyed it, please comment 1. And if you didn't, just hit like. See you in the next videos.